Just start by, I don't think the organizing committee gave themselves enough an applause for organizing this event, so why don't we give them a really proper... The chairman told me that he's starting to work at Goldman Sachs on Monday, so I'm particularly happy to see that Goldman Sachs is still attracting this talent from Africa. My first experience, by the way, of these conferences was the Africa Business Conference ABC at Harvard in about 2005. And so I was interested in listening to the panel before as to what's changed in the last 12 years since I first went to the Africa Business Conference, which was about 1,000 people. And I'm asking myself, why are there only about 200 people in this audience? Where are the other people? Why are we not attracting a bigger audience? Are we happy with the numbers that we have here? I'm not sure, relative to expectation, yes or no. But that's a data point for you about Africa. And I think one of the things that's very clear to me is the innovation and technology developments that we heard about on the panel is driving on the last 12 years a dialogue and a conversation that's quite different from the conversations we were having in 2005, which is interesting, and we'll come back to it. When I talk to audiences like this, particularly young people at the beginning of their careers, graduating with MBAs, starting in various jobs going forward, you've got to think to yourself, okay, where are things over a 30-year period? You don't really, it's not so relevant. It is relevant where we are here today, this spot in time, these issues, whatever's going on in Africa. That's relevant. But the real question underlying things for your career is, are we on the right path for a 30-year development? Is Africa going to be the next China? When we think about that, is it going to be in our lifetimes? Is it my career, your career, or your children's careers where Africa is really going to rise? That's really the core of the question you have to conclude on. And that question really comes down to the following. We have over 1 billion people on the continent. We have huge amounts of opportunity in resources and consumer and technology and communications, in manufacturing. But do we have the foundational base to take advantage of that, and what is required to actually get that real momentum for Africa to take advantage of its natural talents, of its people, of its demographic opportunity? And is Africa actually going to attract, a significant share of the GDP growth in the next 30 years? So when you look at it, Africa is roughly 15% of the world's population. We produce about 2% of the world's GDP. So the upside for Africa going forward to match its population contribution with its GDP contribution is massive. The only continent and country that's risen to that challenge in the last 50 years is China. And so China is remarkable because it's taken so many people out of poverty. It's had this incredible developmental agenda. The physical evidence of that transformation is evident if you visit China. I've been there 14 times since 2007. Every time I go back, it's a new thing. And this One Belt Road, push in China now is about a further transformation, bringing massive cities together, pushing this. Now, are we going to see this kind of transformation in Africa? And that's the real question that's for your generation, for your careers. Now, I would say at the moment, things are not looking particularly good. Now, the reason I'm saying that it's not looking particularly good in the short term is because the key underlying problem in the 20 years odd of my career doing what I'm doing is when you look at things, the opportunities may be there. The global markets are very emerging market friendly right now. Why? Because the United States economy, the recovery post the global financial crisis been more anemic and more slow than people had anticipated. And so the development of the push on interest rates in the United States, the curve, has been slower than people anticipated at the time of the taper tantrum, if you put your mind back. And therefore the wall of money that is looking for yield in the world is actually having a fair share of it going to emerging markets. But let's just think about who emerging markets are. If you exclude China for a second, Russia, not particularly investable. Turkey, loads of difficulties. Brazil, loads of issues in Brazil. Eastern Europe has been good, but it's a relatively contained market, not particularly liquid. Africa, we've had significant problems, but the South African environment and the liquidity of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange in particular, the depth and liquidity of the equity and the debt markets is very, very good, world class. And so that provides the ability to get in and out of this market very quickly. And right now, I know many of the Nigerians and so on are not going to like this, but the reality is that if you want to play Nigeria, the way global investors do it is they buy companies based in Johannesburg that have exposure to the Nigerian market, like MTN, Standard Bank, ShopRite, etc., etc. And they also buy Dangote Cement and other sorts of global companies, but there's very limited liquidity. The liquidity specifically is $2 billion per day, average daily trading volume on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, $30 million. I have a thing I watch every day that comes across my BlackBerry. I read it in the morning. Nigeria headlines, Nigeria average daily trading volume. It's never more than $40 million a day. It's never less than $26 million a day over the last 10 years. So you've got very poor liquidity in the Nigerian Stock Exchange, and that's the second biggest market after the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. So, the way that people used to play China before China had liquid capital markets is they would invest in the Australian Stock Exchange. They would invest in companies like BHP Billiton, Rio Tinto, and others that were exposed to the China growth story, and they would get in and out there. That's what they're doing in the case of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is that, generally speaking, the environment around Africa, as I was saying, outside of this institutional in and out, and the fact that we've got this global wall of money looking for yield, is constrained by there's two key factors. One, institutional weakness. Okay, it's not necessarily vision, it's not necessarily multi-party democracy, it's not necessarily economic institutions, it's do the institutional strengths exist in the various authorities, the regulatory authorities. If you talked about the internet, for example, why are the prices so high in Nigeria? Why the hell do you have so many diesel generators in Nigeria? Why? Because there's a cartel controlling the supply of diesel that doesn't want electricity built, like electricity, coal-fired or gas-fired power plants built in Nigeria. It's got no interest. And it's too endemic in the system in Nigeria for it to be broken. So the regulatory institutions are not strong enough to make sure that the internet, diesel, all of these issues are dealt with decisively. And so, we have this institutional weakness in countries like Kenya, like Nigeria, like South Africa, and other countries that are important, that prevents forward progress in rolling out technology, rolling out the correct pricing barriers, making sure that money that's allocated for education and health in the continent is spent appropriately. We get our bang for the buck. Now, I'll tell you, for example, in South Africa, the problem with education and health is not the amount of money we're spending. It's a massive expenditure relative to other emerging markets, very much on par at the top. The outputs are very poor. The reason the outputs are very poor is that 80% of the education budget gets spent on salaried employees. The salaried employees are not monitored and evaluated properly, and the unions are completely embedded in the process of the education department's appointments of teachers, appointments of inspectors, etc., etc. And there's not sufficient ability to keep the system honest and get the best people in the job. So that the quality of literacy, for example, amongst the teaching population, the inspectorate population, the administration of the education system is extremely wanting. So how do you get rid of that problem? You have to have a new generation. You have to have a new cleansing process. So the institutional weakness is now in the education and health system in South Africa, reproducing apartheid skills into the future. We haven't got rid of that problem. We're not able to politically dispense with it and get the young talent to reproduce itself in the system to get the next generation properly educated and trained. Now that's South Africa, which is one of the most sophisticated countries in Africa. Take countries like Kenya, like Nigeria, like Angola, and so on and so forth. The education system has to produce people that can come to the Cambridges, that people who can go from Cambridge back into the local environments and become the leaders of the future. That's the key problem. So the institutional issue, number one, the leadership issue, number two. Why the leadership issue? There's so much opportunity. You can just sort of see it in the panel. You can see the talent, the passion, the energy to succeed. But the problem's going to be the following. If President Zuma in South Africa, if President Buhari in Nigeria, if President Dos Santos in Angola, okay, if the presidents around Africa are not providing the right leadership, are effectively creating steps that are failing their people in terms of structural economic reform. Think of what's going on in Nigeria in terms of the FX regime, in terms of the economy. I've mentioned energy. Think of the Naira dollar problem, the need to liberate the currency, the need to get free flow of capital, both for import and exporting capital as it's earned in Nigeria. Those issues are really very difficult in Nigeria. In South Africa, the fact that we have massive corruption and exposure of corruption in the state-owned enterprises, the problems around health and education that I mentioned, the problems surrounding a significant lack of certainty around regulation, particularly in the mining sector, the banking sector, and others, means that we have a slowdown in the investment cycle. That slowdown in the investment cycle has caused a significant underinvestment in the economy, and the mixed messages we're getting from that failed leadership is causing a downward spiral, including the firing of a very competent cabinet minister at the end of March, and other cabinet ministers that then led to the Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch downgrading South Africa's rating. And so we're now on the cusp of one further notch to jump status across our local and foreign currency denominated debt. And that in turn will make the cost of capital higher, cause inflation, depreciation of the currency, and so on and so forth. So we have effectively in this situation a government that is shooting South Africans in the foot, shooting Nigerians in the foot, in the context where we actually have very conducive global economic conditions, very supportive markets. So what have you seen in the 18 months since Pravin Gordhan was brought in as the Minister of Finance in South Africa in December 2015 to his firing in March 2017, we went from around 1680 Rand to the dollar to just around 12 Rand 90 Rand to the dollar in a very stormy period. So notwithstanding all the political storms, our currency actually appreciated significantly, and that tells you that the markets are very conducive. Second example, Goldman Sachs raised a bond for Zenith. There were other banks that raised a bond for UBA very recently. Very many times oversubscribed. pricing was very tight. We actually managed to tighten the pricing about 50 basis points between launching the trade and closing the trade, several times oversubscribed. This is an indication that notwithstanding Nigeria's problems around liquidity and around the currency that I described, foreign investors piled into those bonds because they see opportunity, they're looking for yield, they're prepared to take risk and get paid for it. So these are factors that lead you to know that with the right leadership and with the right investment in institutional strength, we can take Africa significantly further than we're currently experiencing. I would say right now we're coming off a bit of a bottom. You know, the commodity bubble bursting 18 months ago or so was a terrific blow to many countries in Africa when the oil price went down all the way to $20 a barrel, obviously has now stabilized around the $50 mark. You know, it really exposed, as Warren Buffett says, you know, when the tide goes out, you're left naked, you're exposed, and it really exposed Africa's economic structural problems. So, where are we, just to take a step back? I think I'm sort of around about 20 minutes, and I want to engage in questions, so I'm going to try and bring this to a close. Where are we at the moment? I think, effectively, we have had, since around 2007, the global financial crisis, 10 very challenging years in the world. We've had 5 particularly challenging years in Africa. We were making significant progress in Africa in terms of economic development. That has tapered off. We have growth around 2%, 3% across Sub-Saharan Africa, whereas we were at 5-6% for the 20 years prior. And we need to maintain that 5-6% growth rate for the next 30 years. So in getting back to that 5-6% growth rate is more about institutional reform, more about electing leaders and effectively holding leaders to account around these kind of infrastructure reforms, the education and health systems, around economic reforms, being much more market friendly, getting the investment cycle going. Now, the one very, very interesting thing I'll tell you is that I've probably had now 5 meetings in the last month with CEOs of global multinational corporations, including Dow, the GE, various other companies that are coming through Africa and effectively saying to themselves, we're actually not that interested in the short-term problems. What we're interested in is, can we build our business for the next 30 years? How are we going to triple our revenue that we have in the continent? How are we going to support the governments to meet their infrastructure objectives? How are we going to get the technological revolution moving in Africa? And what are the advantages how can we take advantage of those situations? The Chinese are asking the question, can we put manufacturing, low-cost manufacturing into Africa? Ethiopia is answering that question in a very positive way. So they're creating industrial parks and so on and so forth. Much better than most other countries. Rwanda is an amazing country in terms of the administration and what it's doing. It's managing its government as close to a McKinsey-style government as any government in the world. You know, performance indicators on ministries and so on and so forth. So they are doing various things like the Ethiopians to attract manufacturing into that country. It's a very small country. So the next 30 years is going to be, I think, a challenge more about institutions and leadership, less about is the world ready for Africa? Actually, the question is Africa ready for the world? And we're going to have to work very hard in Africa to create the conditions to push the agenda forward for Africans, with Africans, by Africans. And you know, I think that the next 30 years holds a huge amount of promise, but we actually have to become much more decisive across the countries in Africa. My final word before opening to questions. When you look at Africa in the last few years, there's many good examples. I mentioned Rwanda, Ethiopia, to some extent what's going on in places like Kenya. Goldman Sachs just advised Vodacom on the Safaricom transaction, which is a very interesting transaction for us, and again put it into focus what countries like Kenya, Safaricom, Equity Bank, various others are doing in the realm of getting finance to consumers and communications in the hands of consumers. It's very good. But the problem is, if you look at East Africa, the Rwandas, Kenyas, Ethiopia, to some extent what's going on in Mozambique, although they had a lot of problems, the big countries are the countries that we're experiencing the most difficulties. South Africa, we're experiencing difficulties. I'm happy to answer questions about that in Q&A. Nigeria is experiencing huge amounts of difficulties, and the health of President Buhari is a concern. And the question is, is Osibanjo, the Deputy President, going to be able to be given the mandate to pursue his economic reforms? And he seems quite capable of doing that. And then Egypt, will the political stability around Egypt remain? Those three countries are the engine rooms of Africa. And if those three countries' engine rooms are spluttering, Africa is not going to succeed. So we need to get particularly South Africa, Nigeria, and Egypt moving. And we need to see those smaller countries continue to progress, continue to clean out corruption, particularly in East Africa, around Kenya, Tanzania, places like that. And we need to think very, very long term about how do we attract this opportunity of multinational companies investing the Chinese interest and the fourth industrial revolution, displacing manufacturing in China, moving manufacturing into Africa from China. These are the big trends. So, we're at the cusp of an interesting opportunity. I think in my lifetime of my career, I'm now turning 55 this year, this sort of trend has been the beginning. I would say my career is about the beginning of Africa. Your career is going to be about, does Africa make it going forward? And your children are going to ask the question, what have we inherited, and are we going to take it to the next step? I'll leave it there and take Q&A.
Colin, just house rules about Q&A. I'm just going to ask one question, and then I'll open the floor to you guys. If I could just ask you to present yourselves and make sure that your questions are actual questions and not necessarily speeches. And if you could also keep them brief, that way we can have as many questions as possible. So my first question is, this trend that you're talking about, certainly from where I'm sitting, as a consultant advising companies, we see it. It's gone from Africa rising, it's gone from Afro-pessimism to Africa rising, and now we have Afro-skepticism or Afro-realism. I've heard a lot of terms coined, and you mentioned that there are limits, limitations on this growth story, which is institutional weakness, lack of leadership, I guess policy uncertainty as well. To maybe bring it home to the audience, because I know the theme of the conference is making an impact. Let's make an impact. How do we, as diaspora, locals, students, operators in business, how do we make an impact on changing this narrative and changing or impacting on these limitations that are holding the continent back?
Two things, entrepreneurship and institutional ownership. The institutional ownership part is, when you start to see MBA graduates start to populate the administrations with professional capacity, that's when we're going to start to see those institutions work properly. Number one. Entrepreneurship is about taking ownership of the opportunity and making money from it. And that means a sustainable path to, let's say, for example, one of you Nigerians was to create an energy company in Nigeria that broke the back of the diesel cartel. You'd be as important to Nigeria as Larry Page has been to the creation of Google. Why? Because energy is one of the biggest constraints in Nigeria. The price, the pollution, the lack of availability of energy constrains that economy. Probably economists say by 1%, if you really got energy moving, you'd have a 1% spur on economic growth. But we can go on and on and on. That's just an example. But I'd say those are the two ways. It really means people like you going back to Nigeria. I was pleased to see on the panel lots of people working in the countries, whether they're based in New York or they're in the countries. But it's better to be in the countries, making those countries work.
So the reverse brain drain, basically.
Absolutely.
Okay, now we will open it up to the floor. Oh my goodness, so many hands. So because we want to be fair, last panel had a lot of guys asking questions, so let's get the girl first at the back. If you could just introduce yourself.
Thanks for calling me a girl. Can you hear me?
The lady.
So my name is Constanza and I used to work at Moody's and I'm now at Invest Africa, which is a platform to bring like-minded sort of high net worth individuals to deploy capital in Africa. You mentioned, Colin, you mentioned earlier that if you want firms to enter into Nigeria, a way to do it is by buying South Africa with exposure to Nigeria. With the current political noise in South Africa and also perhaps the reduced investor confidence, how is that going to impact the trend and therefore Nigeria?
Good question. You want to take the bundles? Or you want to
one at a time?
Okay, so that's South Africa.
Hi, my name is Tafi. I'm a solicitor in the UK, but I'm involved with an initiative of diaspora from Zimbabwe, where I'm from. And what we've done is to put together a fund with the idea of leveraging that and then investing in Zimbabwe. I mean, with these programs, we will not ignorant of what's happening there. So we are aware of the problems, but we're very keen to invest. But I wanted maybe your comment in terms of perhaps the role of diaspora and perhaps, synergies that could happen. Because I think the problem that we've seen or that we sort of seen is that whilst we have the desire to invest and perhaps the resources, they don't go as much as we want. And what we would be very keen on is perhaps institutional support. So I would be very interested to hear your comments and especially directly to do with diaspora.
So South Africa diasporas got a hand over there at the back. The lady in yellow, sorry.
Hi, Colin. Thank you so much for your speech. It was really good, and thank you for the information. So my name is Vedette, and I'm a recent law graduate, but I'm going into banking with HSBC. My question is around the leadership aspect. Although it's quite simplistic, I think that is very important because it's a common theme that we see when we're discussing Africa about the leadership deficit. What do you think is the actual problem with leadership in Africa, and what do you think we can do to rectify it coming into that space in the future? Thank you.
South Africa diaspora leadership. Over to you, Colin.
Question very clearly.
So I think it was about synergies, trying to find synergies between diaspora wanting to help out or having some capacity to help out and the actual needs on the ground, right?
Well, to actually invest.
Yeah.
And we're looking for institutional support.
Yeah.
Actually involved, I'll just deal with the diaspora. We're involved with a diaspora type fund, funding instrument in Nigeria, which is underway. But I would say, the diaspora are quite powerful in Africa. It's part of the reason why it's better to come back and invest directly, because diaspora provide, a large flow of capital, particularly in the places where there's limited capital market formation. So capital coming in and out. And, I would say the most interesting form of capital for capital market poor countries is private equity, because private equity has actually provided quite a significant source of capital for equity risk investing in Africa, in infrastructure, in all sorts of areas, and returned, around 30% dollar IRRs. So from an actual profitability point of view and return on equity, it's proven to be a very interesting asset class. I don't want to get sort of stuck into too much, but we can talk after the conference a little bit. Constantia, on your question, fortunately, I would say the last shoe to drop if things go badly in South Africa is going to be capital market formation. Why? Because the liquidity and history and the strength and the resilience of corporates in South Africa is very, very good. We're really world class. The regulation around the stock exchange, the regulation around governance is best in class if you look at the World Economic Forum type reports. And so I think even if things go really pear-shaped in South Africa over a very extended period of time, that will be the last thing to prove problematic. The question on leadership is a very, very interesting one. It's not an easy one. I think it's something for your Judge Cambridge professors in the room to answer. What makes the difference between good leadership and bad leadership over time? Let's just be very clear. Africa is probably the last place at the moment to complain about poor leadership. In the United States, in the United Kingdom. We really are suffering from poor leadership in the world. I must say the strongest leader in the world today is China. In terms of progressively taking forward the country. And I would say the strongest leader is also one of the scariest leaders in the world, and that's Putin. And then you have Trump and you have, a variety of people. Obviously, Angela Merkel is seen to be a particularly effective and important leader uniting Europe at this point. So it's really critical that she maintains it. Now, where are we? In Africa, we had Mandela and Mbeki. We had Obasanjo in Nigeria. We've had much better leaders than we currently have. But Nigeria, there's a place full of talent. South Africa, a place full of talent. You have a leadership election coming in South Africa, which is pitting Nkosazana Zuma, Dlamini, Jacob Zuma's ex-wife, against Cyril Ramaphosa. Cyril's an outstanding candidate, outstanding leader in the Mandela-esque mold, very much supportive of constitutional democracy, very much supportive of economic reform, of institutionalism, of modernization. And of course, Nkosazana represents, in many senses, a continuation of a patronage set of politics in its proper sense. There's a very interesting World Bank economist who defined corruption as the political distribution through the elite structures of politics of wealth to the political constituency of the ruling party. That is patronage. And it's not so much an illegal as it is a political process. It's not. I'm less concerned here with the questions around legality and morality. I'm more concerned about how the system works, because that's a system that permeates systemically, and it systemically will permeate for a long time. I watched a documentary I would really recommend to everybody to watch. I told my son he should watch it. He's starting a business with Warren Buffett. It's a documentary about Warren's philosophy, and it basically talks about compounding interest. Compounding interest is the idea that marginal movements over time compound to produce dramatically different results. So if you take the Nkosazana Zuma Cyril Ramaphosa dynamic, in my view, Nkosazana Zuma will take marginal declines because of this patronage phenomenon over a long period of time, and Cyril will gradually improve the institutional, the economic and the social and political realities over time. And if you compound that and you measure the delta between the two outcomes, you get your failure of leadership. And that's really the difference. And so the question with Nigeria is the same. You know, what kind of leadership are we having? We choose it because we empower the patronage system. Okay, the political party system is choosing to go the patronage route because in its best interest it wants to, but the people allow it to happen in the population. Then you reproduce unemployment, you reproduce all these problems over a long period of time. You never fix the key problems around infrastructure and other things in these countries. So accountability, but accountability also involves the voting population taking action. We can't elect the leaders that are going to take us down the negative route. We have to elect, and therefore, you know, they say people get the leaders they deserve.
The organizers keep waving at me to tell me that there isn't that much time left. Okay, so we can maybe have one more round. It's an interesting comment you make about, you know, engaging. You know, one thing to maybe link it to the previous panel that social media has changed is that across the continent you're actually seeing the birth of movements that are cross-border, that inspire one another to make an impact politically, to engage politically. So you actually have a generation of young activists that are actually deciding, you know, I'm not too young to run. And you know, in Kenya, I don't know if some of you know Boniface Mwangi is a young social media guy who decided to throw his hat in the race for an MP job, and that's really encouraging because it's showing a new generation trying to impact, you know, domestically. Okay, last round of question. Thanks. You had your hand up. This gentleman.
Me, right?
Yes.
All right, great, nice.
Thanks, Colin. Name is Bokar Conte. I just wanted to come back on the private equity angle you mentioned earlier. So right now, just looking at the private equity space, we've had record fundraising, right? A lot of funds coming to market, and the vast majority of them are focused on North America, Europe, some in Asia, but not much is going into Africa right now. So private capital is not really being directed towards Africa. And like you said, there's been a confluence of factors right now in terms of global capital looking for yield, but then none of it is going to Africa. Is Africa missing out, and are the consequences of this going to be dire for the continent going forward?
Okay, so the issue of capital overhang. 2 more questions, so if we can keep them very, very brief. This gentleman here, the front. Sorry, I'm trying to get people who haven't spoken before.
Yeah, thanks very much, Colin. My name is Patrick Dakwa. My area is into financing of infrastructure. I used to work for African Goldman Bank and also a company called ILFS, financing infrastructure in Africa. Good conversation in terms of, I think no one will argue with you that we lack the leadership and institutions are not strong enough. It's also refreshing to hear you say you've met a few CEOs who are trying to look at the long-term entry into Africa. What do you tell them? Thank you.
Last question, briefly, the gentleman at the back. The questions came on this side.
Thanks, Colin. My name is Odisa. I work in the oil field sector. And just to tap into the very first question, what do you see as the current key growth areas right now, yielding possibly the best returns for now and the coming years within the region? Thank you, sir.
Key growth areas. Very long time, so over to you.
Okay, so on PE funds, actually, my friend, yours is a counter-conventional wisdom perspective, because the conventional wisdom is that Africa is saturated with private equity. It may or may not be true. I think what's happened, there have been some funds, for example, Carlyle, which have big funds that have come in and have done less well, let's say, than they would like to have done. They've had one particular investment in a bank in Nigeria not do so well. They've had other things go quite well. So but it's been relatively modest. Now the problem with that is, you know, when the talk within the large KKRs, Carlyles, etc., is that Africa may be more difficult to do, and you have to do smallish deals for them. So what they like to do is put large amounts of capital to work in big situations with knowledge that the regulation and the exit process and so on is going to be okay. So what you're starting to see actually former actors in this world start up small private equity funds focused on the small deal environment. And then you've got the Helios's, Actuses, and others continuing to plug away and do extremely well. They're doing well. So I would say there's a different type of private equity trending at the moment. And I would say the big funds, the really big funds, are not active. That might be where your question is. What I tell the CEOs, it's an interesting question, but it's more what they tell me actually, because you don't tell Andrew Lipsitch or Jeff Immelt so much. You listen to what they say. But what advice do you give? Well, if I'm lucky enough to be asked to give them advice, I give them advice. But look, the reality is these guys have to see the long term. They have to see beyond the short-term opportunities or constraints. So think about South Africa right now. You have incredibly strong corporates, the very strong democracy. If you haven't read the Moody's report, get a crash course history on what's going on in South Africa. Read that latest report by Moody's. But there are significant opportunities in the market if you think that South Africa is going to take the high road in December this year from a political point of view. Because if it does, you've got the combination of the macro factor, and then you've got a combination of improved economic conditions over a compounded period of time. So your opportunity to buy today assets that are going to worth a lot more going forward is good. So that's just South Africa. And you think about Nigeria, are we bottoming out in the cycle? When is Buhari going to go? When is Zuma going to go? You're going to get a potential upswing. And what assets can you buy today that are going to represent that upswing going forward? And the institutional portfolio investors are playing that. There's already what I call a Zexit trade, Zuma exit trade going on. Okay, and that is basically people saying South Africa is like the Brazil story. The Rousseff came and went, Zuma's come and he'll go, and what follows, and will that be positive? And so what we try and focus on, just with the CEOs, is where is the medium to long-term opportunity that you can invest in today, put capital to work in, build capacity, put your best people to work, and all these guys are very smart, so they know they've got to take the best people from the corporations. If they want to double their revenues, they need to put them in the markets, they need to get to know the markets, partner with the people in the local markets, invest in the infrastructure, take the best-in-class technology, invest in the best companies, and move forward. So that's what I tell them. And then the growth areas, what are the best growth areas? I think there are two obvious growth areas. The one is infrastructure investment, because there's such a dearth of infrastructure in many of these countries. And the second is tourism, because Africa really represents a huge tourism opportunity. Think about the transport and aviation industry, and what can happen related to the tourism industry. And the Chinese, you know what the Chinese do? The first thing they do in a country is they build an airport. So you go to out of the 54 countries, I don't know where I visit the country, I'm always going through a Chinese airport on the ground. There are 1 million Chinese living in Africa, 300,000 in Angola alone. So you go to Gabon, the first thing you do, you go through a Chinese airport. But there's incredible beaches and things that you've never seen in your life in a place like Gabon. But they're inaccessible, so you have to have an airport and airlines flying and all of those things. And then the last thing is manufacturing. I think with good leadership and strong institutions, we can move some of the world's manufacturing to Africa. That's when we'll see a huge amount of employment creation. And employment is the lasting legacy. If you think South Africa's problem of unemployment, with 37% real unemployment, 9 million people out of work looking for it, 16 million people working, is bad. Look at Nigeria. Nigeria has a huge, I think it's a 60% unemployment problem. I mean, it's really, so these legacies are, really draining to the continent. We need to get over them. So those are the opportunities, I think, that represent job-creating growth opportunities. All right, well, thank you so much. I wish you all the best with the conference, and thanks to Cambridge and the steering committee for inviting me.